Starship's second flight was amazing, launching on time without any delays, a full duration burn of all the engines without breaking the pad, a good stage separation, and almost a full duration burn of the ship. It had some issues, and it would have gone better, but I think we were all happy with the outcome and very entertained to say the least. But apart from the stunning images, this test means a lot more. SpaceX has basically solved all major issues, and Starship seems ready to start launching on a regular basis, which will be a turning point not only for its development, but also in spaceflight history. The first test launch of Starship in April was a mix of emotions. On one hand, it finally launched after months of waiting and our patience running off, and it didn't explode on the pad, which was the main concern and the most important thing, as it would have significantly delayed its progress and future launches. On the other hand, it left a big crater under the launch mount, and it sent concrete flying all over the place. It failed in several ways, including 3 Raptor engines not even turning on, and some more failing during the ascent. It also had other issues with the hydraulic thrust vector control, with the engine's performance, and even with the flight termination system, which failed to do its work properly, as it took more than expected to blow up the ship and the booster. All these issues left everyone with a bittersweet taste, and with probably more questions than answers after the test. More questions that added to an already complicated system and that caused some doubts to all of us following the development of this beast of a rocket. How will SpaceX solve all of this? Will the Raptor finally be a reliable engine? Will they be able to build a pad that survives several launches? How will the ship behave in space? The public was divided. On one side, you have the unconditional fans that cheer for everything and that always trust the SpaceX engineers and their ability to solve any problem. On the other side, you have the permanent denialists that have been for the past 10 years forecasting the future failures of SpaceX and Elon, that point to every mistake and that after each success have an explanation why it is not such a big deal. Then you have all the middle options, people that acknowledge all of the amazing SpaceX achievements and the hard work they do, but that also have some doubts about the feasibility of a system like Starship and the big challenges that it involves. At the end, the ones that have the final word and that will decide whether this is a success or a failure are the workers at SpaceX, which have demonstrated over time that it's fine to doubt them, but it is not a good idea to bet against them. And that is exactly what happened during the second flight, as anyone who had bet against SpaceX being able to solve the problems of the first test would have lost a good amount of money. Let's look at all these problems to see how SpaceX managed to solve all of them and erased many doubts that we had about this system. For starters, we have the big elephant in the room, which was the damage to the pad during the first flight. Elon said that the first test would be a success as long as the rocket didn't explode on the pad, and although it technically didn't explode, it left a good amount of destruction under the launch mount, and also all over the launch site. Basically, this made evident that something else was needed to mitigate the power of the 33 engines. SpaceX could have built a traditional flame trench, like the ones in the pads in Cape Canaveral, which have been tested and used for many decades and they work pretty well. The problem was that this was not easy to do in Boca Chica, as it would require a huge amount of work and probably the rebuilding of most of the launch pad, as these flame trenches are huge and require a lot of space that they don't have there. So SpaceX decided to do what they always do, start from scratch using the first principle approach and try to think outside the box. They came up with a steel pancake and a water deluge system that in theory should do the work, but that no one would fully trust until it survived the launch. And it did survive. Even more so, it made it without any visible scratch, and it looks like we have a new way to manage the energy of big rockets without having to build large trenches. Then we had the failure of many engines before and during the first flight, and this was a major problem, as the engine is the most important and difficult part of any rocket, and SpaceX needs this engine to be able to fly over and over, not just once, so its reliability is crucial to Starship's success. Moreover, SpaceX had never done a good full-duration test of the 33 engines, not even during the static fires, as there were always some problems that prevented them from working reliably. But this was also a big win in the second flight, as all the engines of the Super Heavy fired for the full duration and without any apparent issue. It was probably the most amazing part of the flight, to see how all the engines combined to form a 9-meter diameter Mach diamond and probably the best spaceflight images we have seen in a while. This was the first time we had a fully successful engine fire, and it did so exactly as planned and propelled the full stack up to the stage separation. Which was the third major win, a good hot stage separation done at the first try and without any catastrophic outcome. Let's stop here for a moment. 7 months ago, after the first test, SpaceX decided to try a new stage separation method, hot staging, which means that the ship starts its engines before the booster fully stops theirs, having then a continuous thrust during the process. This method had been used before on other rockets, but never by SpaceX and never with a rocket intended to be reusable. In half a year, they designed and built the hot stage ring. They tested it, and then, at the first attempt, it performed flawlessly. It is incredible the speed at which these people implement their ideas, and the pace at which they innovate and deliver. We don't know exactly how successful the hot staging was, but it looked pretty good, and it seems like SpaceX has found their preferred method for this, after unsuccessfully trying to do a complicated maneuver during the first flight. Finally, we have the almost successful burn of the second stage, which brought Starship to almost its intended velocity, but suffered an issue 30 seconds before the end. Although this was not fully accomplished, it was the first time that the second stage was fired during an integrated test, and the first time the vacuum engines were fired during flight. The 6 engines started without any issues, and fired for 5 minutes, until something happened and the flight termination system was activated. It worked well enough, and finally Starship was in space, over 100 km Kármán line, and it did a good job considering it was the first time it made it so far. To sum up, SpaceX resolved all the issues that arose during the first test, and achieved all the goals that they had set to consider the second test a success. So even the test could have gone better, it was very good, and they not only learned a lot, but also proved that they could solve most of the major problems they had. But not everything was as smooth, and new challenges have appeared that were not a priority before. First, they need to understand what caused the second stage issue, as the main objective is still to get into orbit, and it won't be possible until the ship also has a fully successful run. They will also need to understand what happened with the booster during the boost back burn, as not all the engines lit and some of them failed after, causing the loss of control of the booster and the activation of its flight termination system. And after that, they still need to recover both the booster and the ship, which includes a re-entry from orbit and the need for the ceramic tiles to work perfectly. Something that has not been tested yet, and looks a bit worrying, as some tiles fall off during the flight and they need to be all attached if we want Starship to get back from orbit in one piece. In conclusion, they still need to solve several issues, which are not easy and are very important, as the reusability in this vehicle is not only an option, but a crucial part of it. But during this second flight, we've seen how all these first test issues have been solved, and now they have managed to almost have a fully successful mission just at their second attempt. And all of this while implementing a lot of new methods, like the hot staging and the new water deluge system, which highlights the impressive dedication of SpaceX workers and engineers, as no other company or agency would have done all these improvements in such a short time. Now, they need to solve all the problems that appeared during this test, which should be easier, as the most relevant ones have already been addressed, and most importantly, they won't need to spend half a year rebuilding the pad and making big improvements to the next rocket. If everything goes as planned, they should be able to do the third test in a couple of months, and that's the biggest change from the first flight. SpaceX is already in a position to start launching almost monthly, and once they start, there is no turning back. SpaceX needs Starship to start sending the new Starlink V2 satellites, and to send a fuel depot and start testing the propellant transfer in orbit. They have the money, the demand, and the need for this rocket, and the only thing holding them back were these issues that the second test not only solved, but performed pretty well. Now, the limiting factor will be the pace at which they can build new rockets, not the time spent rebuilding the pad and designing big changes. And they have already proved that they can build this rocket very quickly, so it's just a matter of time until we see these beasts flying every few weeks and SpaceX starts revolutionizing the industry once again. Let's hope that one day we can look back to this moment and see it as the beginning of something huge that will change our lives forever. Take care and learn more.